I cannot imagine a happier place for me to be today. This is the last day of the month that is exactly 40 years since I wrote Diet for a Small Planet. How perfect to be sharing it with my new heroes. So I want to, Chancellor Holla, Ken Tung, Megan, and Nathan, and Ryan, I want to be your ambassador. I want to be hired. I want to tell your story wherever I go. I'm so impressed with what I've learned, and so proud to be so just down the road near Boston. So I'm going to go big picture on you right now. I'm going to try to watch my watch here, so I won't go big time with you, but big picture with you, because your brilliance to me confirms everything I believe. So naturally, I love you. What I mean by that is that I argue that it's not global heating, it's not global poverty that we really have to worry about. The only thing we really have to worry about is people's feeling powerless to address these, to manifest the solutions. I say that because of people like you, that we know that solutions to all of these problems are actually within our reach. Many have shown that, first of all, we start with the realization, take energy, that every day the sun supplies us on this earth 15,000 times the dose of energy that we're currently using in fossil fuel. And many studies have been done to show that we could easily transition to renewable energy in this country on really much less than we spent just on nuclear subsidies, for example. We can do that. Food, we know right now there's enough food for everyone on this planet. There's now about 30% more food per person on our earth than when I wrote Diet for a Small Planet. And yet, we have more people hungry than ever before. We know now, brilliant study done at the University of Michigan, that agroecology, part of the larger family of permaculture, has the capacity to feed us all now and to increase production if the whole world went toward organic, sustainable agriculture. So, if solutions are known, what could be powerful enough to keep us from manifesting what we know? That has been the question of my life. Why are we creating a world together that not one of us as individuals would ever choose? That is the question. And over the decades, I love getting old, and I can say over the decades, and I feel I have authority. Over the decades, I've figured out, with a lot of help from a lot of brilliant people, that for our species, there's only one thing so powerful to prevent us from actually having the world we want. And that is the power of ideas. That one of the unique things about our species, that we create the world according to ideas that we hold. The power of frame, you may have heard that word come into common parlance now. My daughter and I call it our mental map. We literally can't see what's not in our mental map. I'll tell you a really homey example of this. Last Thanksgiving, I got up in the morning knowing 33 people were coming for dinner in the afternoon, and I was ready to make my favorite root vegetable dish. And I looked everywhere for my Dutch oven that I always use for cooking my root vegetables, and I could not find it, and I got so frustrated, and I up and down the attic and the basement and the cupboards, and I gave up. I started doing something else, turned around, and there it was. Only I couldn't see it because it had a plant in it. So, my mental map, I was looking for a kitchen item. But I had turned it into a planter, so it didn't fit my mental map. I literally could not see it. And it's red. It's very obvious. So that's a very homey example of this phenomenon. The problem, this is a big claim I'm laying out on this beautiful day of celebration. But I'm claiming that the crisis of our species, that then it's become a crisis for millions of other species, is that the dominant mental map that we are continuing to absorb and to put forth is fundamentally life-destroying. That's a problem. And so I name it in my new book, I call it the scarcity mind. We absorb the idea of this mechanical worldview where we're each separate from one another, separate from those plants out there. We're all in a competitive struggle over lack. There's not enough of anything. We absorb the idea there's not enough energy, there's not enough food, there's not enough water, there's not enough love, there's not enough parking places in Boston. You know, there's just really not enough of anything. So in that world, we become very fearful. We become very fearful. But it's not just that there's not enough goods, there's not enough goodness either. Because we absorb the idea that if you peel away the fluff from human nature, that we are fundamentally egoistic, we are greedy, we are selfish, we are competitive and materialistic. And so believing this world of lack is the real thing is really scary. And it causes us to distrust ourselves. We can't possibly, if we distrust ourselves, if we really believe this caricature of human nature, we can't possibly come together and create what you've just created because we're in this competitive struggle. And we have to turn over our fate to others. But even better, we believe that we are so flawed, we can't come together in a kind of co-creative process that you're demonstrating, which I call the small d democracy, learning to negotiate and to plan together and to create together. We can't do that. So we come to believe we must turn over our fate to some automatic force. And it was named some decades ago the magic of the market, if we just turn over our fate to that. Unfortunately, this magical market that we've come to believe in, like all markets, it has a rule, and this rule is highest return to existing wealth. So we end up, we're living in an economy then where wealth accrues to wealth, accrues to wealth, until we reach the point in 2005 that Citigroup named our economy today a plutonomy. The top 1% of us controlling more wealth than the bottom 90%. So most shocking to me as I was researching this book, we now have greater inequality in America than India. And many other countries we would not want to compare ourselves unfavorably to. So this is the reality that then, no matter how much we produce, people experience scarcity. Think about it. We're the world's biggest exporter, yet half of our children now, University of Michigan study, half of our children will be on food stamps at some point. So we experience scarcity, which then reinforces the frame of scarcity and says, see, I told you so, there's not enough, there's not enough, there's not enough. So, fortunately, at this moment, and you are embodying it here, there's a whole other way of seeing life that is based in science, that is based in our everyday experience, that is based in our common sense, and based in new findings in anthropology and archaeology and psychology, neuroscience. It is a way of understanding life. I call it an eco-mind. Yes, we've known this for some time. Life is not these separate little competitive entities. We are all connected moment to moment with one another, with all the rest of life. As Dennis Noble at Oxford University, physiologist, in his little book called The Music of Life, it's a beautiful little book, he writes that in biological systems, there is no privileged component telling the rest what to do. Rather, the shape of life is created moment to moment by the interaction of all elements in the system. Or as my friend, German physicist Hans-Peter Dürer puts it, Frankie, in a biological system, there are no parts, there are only participants. So we are all together, moment to moment, co-creating our reality. And this is a very different, and for me, so much more freeing understanding of the nature of life. And this garden, this beautiful garden, is a perfect illustration of that, what can manifest and what also represents the eco-mind, this ecological understanding of life itself that I find so incredibly empowering. But to realize its power, because we can't see what we don't believe in. You know, we hear this idea that seeing is believing, but actually believing is seeing. We have to believe in another way of being in order to see it emerging. That's my thesis. And unfortunately, a lot of the environmental movement that I identify with, nonetheless, it's trapped in certain messages that are actually keeping us in the fear and scarcity frame. So I just want to mention a couple of examples of what I mean, because I think we need to break free of this false frame of lack in order to experience the potential of the eco-mind. So I'll just give you one example. In my book, there are 7 thought traps and 7 thought leaps. I'll just mention a couple of thought traps and leaps to give you an idea of how important it is to reshape how we see, so how we understand. We often hear the idea, oh, all these problems are occurring because we've hit the limits of a finite Earth. We've hit the limits of a finite Earth, and we have to pull back. And I'm suggesting that that frame right there, for people, especially when you consider that a huge portion of Americans are already struggling, not to mention people around the world, when they hear that we've hit the limits of a finite Earth and have to pull back, oh my gosh, that is really scary and not exactly motivating for people. And so what's wrong with that message, we've hit the limits of a finite planet? Well, as you know, many of you know, that it's kind of odd to say that we've hit the limits of a finite planet if, in fact, it's true, which it seems to be. Scientists, that very credible scientists, say that we're wasting in this country from 55% to as much as 87%. I've seen credible estimates of all the energy that's available, that is used in this country, up to 87%. I think of food, for example. We waste over 40% of the food in this country. So how can we talk about hitting the limits when we're wasting almost as much as we're eating? So I think from that point of view, it's problematic. That frame is problematic. Another aspect of it, of course, is that if you hear the challenge described as we've hit the limits of a finite Earth, then you think, oh, we just have to cut back. But think about plastic bottles, for example, 30 billion a year. Oh, well, what if we went to 15 billion? That still would be more than nature cycles could incorporate and regenerate. So that hitting the limits and cutting back is problematic from that point of view. And it just dawned on me there's another problem with that idea that we've hit the limits of a finite Earth. And that is that when I hear that, I think, oh, well, if we've hit the limits of nature, maybe we have to go beyond nature. Maybe we need geoengineering. Maybe we need genetically modified seeds because nature is not providing for us. And that is hugely problematic. So what is a different way of seeing that is embodied in this garden behind me? It is not we've hit the limits of a finite Earth, but we've been malaligned with, in fact, perversely aligned with the laws of nature. So the challenge, the thought leap that I'm suggesting we're making is to understand that as we align with nature's rules, then there is more than enough for all. And the other thing that starts to happen when we move from this limits frame to an alignment frame is that agriculture then is privileged, is held up, because we understand that farming can be a very direct way to actually rebalance the carbon cycle. In other words, if we just stay in the limits frame, all we think is cutting fossil fuel use. But if we move into the alignment frame, we begin to think about riding the cycle, the carbon cycle. And agriculture is key to balancing the carbon cycle. In fact, we know that agriculture can become not only carbon neutral, but much better than that. And in fact, I just heard an estimate. I talk in EcoMind about agroforestry, the integration of trees and farms. And one estimate from the UN Agroforestry Center is that if we did used agroforestry to its full extent, that itself could address about 1/3 of the excess carbon that is currently throwing the carbon balance out of cycle. And you know what else happens when we shift from a limits to an alignment frame? We see that some of the poorest people on Earth are our climate heroes, because 70% of our food is produced still not by agribusiness, but by small farmers in Africa and Asia, here in Latin America, etc. And it's by their becoming empowered to grow food in an ecological way, they are key to the challenge of climate change today. So we start valuing, for example, my favorite story right now about small farmers is Niger. You heard about it a lot last year. It's really almost at the bottom, if not the bottom, depending on the year, of the Human Development Index. Niger. All you heard about last year was famine. And yet over the last 20 years, farmers there have regreened 12.5 million acres of land, nourished the flourishing of 200 million trees, and secured food security for 2.5 million people. And yet we don't hear about it. So I asked this development expert from Amsterdam that I know, I said, Chris, why didn't anybody tell us this is going on? This is phenomenal. And you know what he said? He said, Frankie, nobody thought to look. Again, the mental map. You assume that there's nothing happening because these are poor people in a poor part of Africa. So this frame is absolutely essential to what we're really looking for. So also, as you know, as you shift into an alignment frame, you start realizing that we can create a world in which there is no waste. There is no waste. I met Ryan at the Omega Institute, and we both realized that we had to stop talking about wastewater, we were told, because in fact, over a 36-hour cycle, all the water in that institute that serves at its max about 25,000 gallons of water a day, something like that, is completely purified through natural systems of plants and microorganisms in 36 hours. So there is no wastewater because it all becomes beautifully clean in 36 hours. So that is another advantage of beginning to think in alignment rather than limits. So I want to jump to two final parts of my talk, and because I really think the second largest thought trap is this idea that human beings, you know, it's those selfish consumers who are the problem. We are just these greedy, competitive materialists. That idea about human nature, it goes right to the heart of what makes this vision possible. And, you know, I noticed even my heroes like E.O. Wilson, I'm sure many of you studied his work, even he, bless his dear heart, he uses the phrase, we have to overcome our Stone Age emotions. And I want to say, no, no, no. What we are learning about human nature, now they can look at our brains when, you know, with MRI scans, and they realize that no, when we cooperate, that actually it's so pleasurable, it evolved to be so pleasant to cooperate that when we do, that parts of our pleasure centers are stimulated that are like when we eat chocolate. I mean, that's how great cooperation is. And in other studies that psychologists have done, they find that, you know, we've been told by our religious leaders that giving is better than receiving, but actually it turns out to be more fun too, because when they compare what happens to our reward centers when we are spending money on other people, we find that that's much more pleasurable than spending it on ourselves. And I could go on and on this list of these qualities that we have. I'll just mention one more that is clearly evident, and that is that we are creatures, we didn't get to 7 billion being couch potatoes and whiners. We are doers. We need to feel that we have effect. As the brilliant social philosopher Erich Fromm put it, let's ditch Descartes' I think therefore I am. And actually when you look at our species, what we really are, it should be boiled down to I am because I affect. And so the joy I sense in what you have accomplished here embodies that idea that our happiness is when we feel that we have power to actually create and to create together. And I would just add on the flip side of that, that one reason that depression is now a global pandemic is so few people have that sense of power to follow their own common sense and their values. And so we can, an eco-mind can give us a way to rethink this question of what is human nature. Because clearly we now know that we have all of these glorious pro-social qualities, and yet history shows us and lab experiments show us when we've been the guinea pigs that we can also, most of us, not few of us, most of us will behave brutally in the wrong conditions. Whether we're talking, as I say, about the Holocaust or about lab experiments, we have to accept that about ourselves. But an eco-mind then shows us we are like any other organism in the ecosystem. We respond just like the plants out there in the garden. We respond if we have the right environmental stimulus to bring out the best in us and keep the worst in us in check. And I would hazard that one of the most liberating things for us is to identify what are the conditions that bring out the best in us, and then we know what to do as we reverse them. And I would, very humbly, this is my short list anyway, suggest that there are at least 3 conditions that bring out the worst in us, and that is concentration of power, as we've seen over and over and over in history and today in the United States. I mentioned the top 1% controlling as much wealth as the bottom 90. The second, I would say, secrecy brings out the worst in us, and transparency brings out the best. And I noticed recently a study done on a university campus where there was an honor system for coffee, where people had to pay for their own coffee, and maybe a small fraction was actually paying. And so somebody had the idea of putting a picture of a pair of human eyes above the honor system station, and you guessed it, people started paying just to be reminded of transparency. So, and the third condition that I think brings out the worst or the best is, on the one hand, the blame game brings out the worst, and mutual accountability, where we're stepping up together, sharing responsibility for co-creation. That's what brings out the best in us. And so the eco-mind, where we're looking at everything as a product of the relationships in the environment, is a way to understand even down to how our own organism, the human organism, can thrive in community. And so my closing remarks are really then about what keeps us from jumping into the world we want, to breaking free of this limiting frame of lack, limiting frame I call the scarcity mind. I would say part of the reason that we say so stuck and feel so, many of us feel we don't have choice, is because we can't imagine yet a truly interactive system of problem solving, a true, not a democracy done to us or for us, but what I love to call a living democracy that is aligning the rules with what we now know brings out the best in human nature. And so that is the next challenge, I think, for our species, and that is why I so honor this kind of engagement here, because to me, there's nothing more powerful than connecting directly with the earth. And to do that, we share then the co-creation and the actual work we share together. It is our way, and it has been historically our way, to connect us back to the earth, where we learn these principles that we're not separate, and it connects us to one another, and it connects us through culture in all ways. So food, I believe, has this very special power. And I would close with this much more personal thought, and that is that we live in such a time, as Ryan mentioned, as I did my short list, of these enormous global problems. And yet we know, we can imagine this world that somehow to me is now embodied in this garden. And so what do we need now? What qualities do we need? And all I can do is share with you what I'm working on personally, that I've come to call bold humility. Bold humility is what I'm saying the world needs from us now. And the bold part is this, is that we evolved, as you know, in tightly knit tribes where staying with the pack was absolutely life. That was preservation. If we separated ourselves, that was sure death. Well, right now, the way I think about it, the hyper tribe is kind of headed over Victoria Falls, not exactly serving life. So we're headed in this terrible direction. So separating from the pack can be really scary still, though, because we evolved in these tightly knit tribes. So separating from friends or groups we've been part of in order to create the new can still be scary. So part of what I'm working on is this kind of boldness, I call it, where I keep trying to rethink fear itself. Fear is, in some sense, just energy that we can use to break away and to come up with new ideas, set goals that seem way out of reach, but then maybe we can get there. But it still brings up fear. And so I have a cheesy gimmick that I use that I will share with you. And it's this, is that when I start getting really afraid that I'm going to separate from my group and say something and do something and put myself out there publicly in a way that I could get shot down, my heart goes bum, 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 bum. And I used to say, you wimp, whenever that would happen. And then it dawned on me a few years ago that no, I'm going to start naming that inner applause. And it doesn't always work, but it works enough of the time. So it says, oh yeah, maybe that pounding heart means I'm exactly where I should be, doing exactly what I should be doing rather than making an idiot of myself. So this idea of bold humility suggests that then we can build power. And one of the ways that we can build power and start to have more energy to engage is with the eco-mind telling us that, many of you heard about mirror neurons. This is discovered in Italy in the 1990s. That means when I'm doing like this with my hands, actually you're doing like this with your hands because there are neurons in your brain that are firing as if you were I. Think of that power that gives us, that idea that we are actually reacting moment to moment to everything in our environment. We are actually, some of our brain is operating as if we were doing what we observed. Think of the power. Think of the power of this example, that everyone who watches what you're doing here, everybody who hears about this in some way is truly affecting their neural firing of their brain. And so it means that we know how to make ourselves more powerful. We hang out with courage. We determine to bring stories into our lives of people more courageous than we. We don't just read the daily news. We also seek out examples of people who are pushing the edge of hope, pushing toward the new, as you are here in this celebration today. And take seriously that is making us more courageous. I just saw a study done at the University of Virginia where they put students in two groups with heavy backpacks on their back. And one group had a friend by their side, the other group stood alone. And then they asked the students, how high is that hill in front of you? And it turns out that those who had a friend by their side saw that hill as much less steep. And so it is the kind of the group that you had here that worked on this together that, of course, this seemed impossible to transfer a half of, what was it, 500,000 pounds? But it's that group that, yes, we can do this. That hill became less steep. And so in effect then, I'm suggesting that from an eco-mind, we realize that the only choice we don't have is whether to change the world. Because everything we're doing, someone is watching and someone is being affected, and we are also being affected. Even if we choose not to act, we are still affecting everything around us. And so that is where then the humility part, I will end with that humility piece, because I realized that, and this was very humbling, a few years ago I realized that the things that most get me out of bed in the morning, kind of literally, that most keep me alive, I would have given almost no chance of success when I was your age or even older. I would have said, no, that can't happen. When I founded Food First with Joe Collins and we were writing about the need for farmers to have land, Brazil, I would have thought, would be the last country in the world that would have a successful land reform. And now, just a few years ago, we celebrated with the landless workers movement of Brazil that has been able to settle about 1/3 families on 35 million acres of land, creating many, many new farms and enterprises and teaching agroecology to their members. I would have said, no, that couldn't happen, and it did. Or just a very immediate example, I grew up in Texas, and I would have thought Texas would be the last place on earth ever to have renewable energy, and yet, because they took a democratic approach, this collaborative approach, some utility companies in Texas in the 1990s brought people together and asked them what kind of energy they wanted, and they had a lot of information from all sides of the equation, but these Texans who were hooked on fossil fuels, then by the end of all of this collaborative discussion, went for renewables in a big way, and that's one of the reasons that now that Texas wind investment has made the U.S. one of the leading wind producers in the world. I would have said, no, that's not possible, but it is. And then I want to mention today, more than as I close here, I want to mention and to honor the woman who has perhaps been my greatest hero of my life. She's been the lodestar of courage for me. She passed away on Sunday. I'm speaking of Wangari Maathai. She planted 7 trees on Earth Day. Sorry. She planted 7 trees on Earth Day in 1977 in Kenya. She planted 7 trees to honor 7 environmental leaders. And she went through all sorts of humiliation, and she stood up against the logging of the forest in Kenya. She was jailed and beaten. She's continued to show leadership. She won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. Well, when I began to hear about what she was doing and learned about her tree planting, never, ever would I have imagined that by now 45 million trees had been planted by village women in Kenya and other countries because of her courage. And then Wangari's example of the Greenbelt movement, she started working with the UNEP, United Nations Environmental Program. And here again, ye of little faith here. I read about that a few years ago where they set the goal of UNEP, Plant for the Planet program. They set the goal of 1 billion trees planted per year. And I read that and I thought, yeah, right, you know, that's pretty ambitious, but I hope it goes. That was in '07. Do you know where we are now? 11 billion trees. 7 trees, 11 billion trees, one hero who has inspired me and millions of other people. And so I just want to say that with an eco mind, it is not possible to know what's possible. And so you start out a year ago, you run into, as you said, Megan, a brick wall. It's not possible to know what's possible. And now already you're talking about not a garden, but gardens. So thank you very much. I want to be your ambassador. I want to tell your story. And I want you to feel really great about yourselves. Thank you.
So thank you, Frances, for raising awareness about living democracy, fear, and personal empowerment on an international scale. While workers like Frances seek systemic solutions to these issues, the work of UMass Permaculture here on campus is changing paradigms on a local scale. Our garden is changing the way UMass thinks about food. This is our overarching goal, education about sustainable food. When the students asked the chefs about what they wanted in the garden, the chefs told them that if we planted the entire plot with tomato plants, they would use those all in one day. We have 16,000 students on meal plans, as Ken said earlier. There's no way we can feed this whole campus, but that's not our main goal. Thousands walk by this garden daily, and we can't feed them all, but we can demonstrate different ways of thinking about how land is used, where food is grown, and who grows food. This is a site of education and student empowerment. And to that end, we want to thank our student committee who made all of this possible. Let's give them a hand for creating this amazing garden and putting this event together. None of this could have happened without students. This project has been initiated by students, carried out by students, and would have been completely impossible if not for the overwhelming support and help we've received from our students. For that, we are dedicating our Franklin Permaculture Garden to our students, past, present, and future. I would like to invite those students to come up and join me in the front of the room. We have here represented former students, alumni who have taken the knowledges and experiences they've gained at UMass out into the world and laid the groundwork that enables us to do this work. We also have present students, like myself. We are learning about the world we live in and creating the positive changes we so urgently need. And finally, we welcome to the front of the room our future students, the next generation of passionate individuals who will carry on the work that has been started here by those that came before them. Each of these students is being handed a stone. Is now being handed a stone. These stones represent the powerful role that every UMass student has in creating positive change in the world. Each stone is unique in age, size, and character, but together they are defining our paths as we move forward into a future of sustainable human communities and food justice for everyone. We will now place these stones in the garden as a permanent symbol of the power students have when working together. We invite you to stay to witness the placing of these stones in our garden. For the next half hour, we also invite you to go downstairs and place your own stone in the garden, get a tour. And in the back of the room, you can sample some Franklin Garden butternut squash soup. You can buy a UMass Permaculture t-shirt. You can listen to some more industrial waste, and you can get your book signed by Frances Moore Lappe. So to express our sincere gratitude for everyone's attendance today, we will be handing out heirloom butternut squash seeds at the door, saved right from the garden, so that you can all take with you the seed of permaculture and incorporate it into your lives. Thank you all so much for coming. Your support is what inspires us. Thank you.